The colonel came to me one day and told me that my lawyers had obtained a habeas corpus for me, and that I was to be released, that the military would give me a ticket to any place I desired. "Colonel," said I can accept nothing from men whose business it is to shoot down my class whenever they strike for decent wages. I prefer to walk." "All right, mother," said he. "Good-bye." The operators were bringing in Mexicans to work as scabs in the mines. In this operation they were protected by the military all the way from the Mexican borders. They were brought into the strike territory without knowing the conditions, promised enormous wages and easy work. They were packed in cattle cars in charge of company gunmen, and if, when arriving, they attempted to leave, they were shot. Hundreds of these poor fellows had been lured into the mines with promise of free land. When they got off the trains, they were driven like cattle into the mines by gunmen. This was a method that broke the strike 10 years previously, and now it was the scabs of a decade before who were striking, the docile contract labor of Europe. I was sent down to El Paso to give the facts of the Colorado strike to the Mexicans who were herded together for the mines in that city. I held meetings. I addressed Mexican gatherings. I got the story over the border. I did everything in my power to prevent strikebreakers going into the Rockefeller mines. In January 1914, I returned to Colorado. When I got off the train at Trinidad, the militia met me and ordered me back on the train. Nevertheless, I got off. They marched me to the telegrapher's office. Then they changed their minds and took me to the hotel where they had their headquarters. I told them I wanted to get my breakfast. They escorted me to the dining room. "Who is paying for my breakfast?" said I. "The state," said they. "Then as the guest of the state of Colorado, I'll order a good breakfast." And I did, all the way from bacon to pie. The train for Denver pulled in. The military put me aboard it. When we reached Walsenburg, a delegation of miners met the train, singing a miner song. They sang at the top of their lungs till the silent old mountains seemed to prick up their ears. They swarmed into the train. "God bless you, Mother." "God bless you, my boys." "Mother, is your coat warm enough? It's freezing cold in the hills." "I'm all right, my lad." The chap had no overcoat, a cheap cotton suit, and a bit of woolen rag around his neck. Outside in the station stood the militia. One of them was a fiend. He went about swinging his gun, hitting the miners, and trying to prod them into a fight, hurling vile oaths at them. But the boys kept cool, and I could hear them singing above the shriek of the whistle as the train pulled out of the depot and wound away through the hills. From January on until the final brutal outrage, the burning of the tent colony in Ludlow, my ears wearied with the stories of brutality and suffering. My eyes ached with the misery I witnessed. My brain sickened with the knowledge of man's inhumanity to man. It was, "Oh, Mother, my daughter has been assaulted by the soldiers. Such a little girl." "Oh, Mother, did you hear how the soldiers entered Mrs. Hall's house? How they terrified the little children, wrecked the home, and did worse? Terrible things, and just because Mr. Hall, the undertaker, had buried 2 miners whom the militia had killed?" And, "Oh, Mother, did you hear how they are arresting miners for vagrancy, for loafing, for making them work in company ditches without pay, making them haul coal and clear snow up to the mines for nothing?" "Mother, Mother, listen! A Polish fellow arrived as a strike-breaker. He didn't know there was a strike. He was a big, strapping fellow. They gave him a star and a gun and told him to shoot strikers." "Oh, Mother, they've brought in a shipment of guns and machine guns. What's to happen to us?" A frantic mother clutched me. "Mother Jones!" she screamed. "Mother Jones, my little boy's all swollen up with the kicking and beating he got from a soldier because he said, 'Howdy, John D. Feller.' 'Twas just a kid teasing, and now he's lying like dead." "Mother, 'tis an outrage for an adjunct general of the state to shake his fist and holler in the face of a gray-haired widow for singing a Union song in her own kitchen while she washes the dishes." "It is all an outrage," said I. "'Tis an outrage indeed that Rockefeller should own the coal that God put in the earth for all the people. 'Tis an outrage that gunmen and soldiers are here protecting mines against workmen who ask, a bit more than a crust, a bit more than bondage. 'Tis an ocean of outrage. Mother, did you hear of poor old Colner? He was going to the post office and was arrested by the militia. They marched him downhill, making him carry a shovel and a pick on his back. They told him he was to die and must dig his own grave. He stumbled and fell on the road. They kicked him and he staggered up. He begged to be allowed to go home and kiss his wife and children good-bye. "We'll do the kissing," laughed the soldiers. At the place they picked out for his grave, they measured him, and then they ordered to dig 2 feet deeper, they told him. Old Colner began digging while the soldiers stood around laughing and cursing and playing craps for his tin watch. Then Colner fell fainting into the grave. The soldiers left him there till he recovered by himself. There he was alone, and he staggered back to camp. Mother, and he isn't quite right in the head. I sat through long nights with sobbing widows, watching the candles about the corpse of the husband burn down to their sockets. "Get out and fight," I told these women. "Fight like hell till you go to heaven." That was the only way I knew to comfort them. I nursed men back to sanity who were driven to despair. I solicited clothes for the ragged children, for the desperate mothers. I laid out the dead, the martyrs of the strike. I kept the men away from the saloons, whose licenses, as well as those of the brothels, were held by the Rockefeller interests. The miners armed as it is permitted every American citizen to do in defense of his home, his family, as he is permitted to do against invasion. The smoke of armed battle rose from the arroyos and ravines of the Rocky Mountains. No one listened, no one cared. The tickers in the office of 26 Broadway sounded louder than the sobs of women and children. Men in the steam-heated luxury of Broadway offices could not feel the stinging cold of Colorado hillsides where families lived in tents. Then came Ludlow, and the nation heard. Little children roasted alive make a front-page story. Dying by inches of starvation and exposure do not. On the 19th of April, 1914, machine guns, used on the strikers in the Paint Creek strike, were placed in position above the tent colony of Ludlow. Major Pat Hamrock and Lieutenant K.E. Linderfelt were in charge of the militia, the majority of whom were company gunmen sworn in as soldiers. Early in the morning, soldiers approached the colony with the demand from headquarters that Louis Tikas, leader of the Greeks, surrender 2 Italians. Tikas demanded a warrant for their arrest. They had none. Tikas refused to surrender them. The soldiers returned to quarters. A signal bomb was fired, then another. Immediately the machine guns began spraying the flimsy tent colony, the only home the wretched families of the miners had, riddling it with bullets. Like iron rain, bullets upon men, women, and children. The women and children fled to the hills. Others tarried. The men defended their home with their guns. All day long the firing continued. Men fell dead, their faces to the ground. Women dropped. The little Snyder boy was shot through the head, trying to save his kitten. A child carrying water to his dying mother was killed. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the miners had no more food, nor water, nor ammunition. They had to retreat with their wives and little ones into the hills. Louis Tikas was riddled with shots while he tried to lead women and children to safety. They perished with him. Night came. A raw wind blew down the canyons where men, women, and children shivered and wept. Then a blaze lighted the sky. The soldiers, drunk with blood and with the liquor they had looted from the saloon, set fire to the tents of Ludlow with oil-soaked torches. The tents, all the poor furnishings, the clothes and bedding of the miners' families burned. Coils of barbed wire were stuffed into the well, the miners' only water supply. After it was over, the wretched people crept back to bury their dead. In a dugout under a burned tent, the charred bodies of 11 little children and 2 women were found unrecognizable. Everything lay in ruins. The wires of bed springs writhed on the ground as if they, too, had tried to flee the horror. Oil and fire and guns had robbed men and women and children of their homes and slaughtered tiny babies and defenseless women. Done by order of Lieutenant Linderfelt, a savage, brutal executor of the will of the Colorado Fuel and Oil Company. The strikers issued a general call to arms, Every able-bodied man must shoulder a gun to protect himself and his family from assassins, from arson and plunder. From jungle days to our own so-named civilization, this is a man's inherent right. To a man they armed. Throughout the whole strike district, Ludlow went on burning in their hearts. Everybody got busy. A delegation from Ludlow went to see President Wilson. Among them was Mrs. Petrucci, whose 3 tiny babies were crisped to death in the black hole of Ludlow. She had something to say to her president. Immediately, he sent the United States Cavalry to quell the gunmen. He studied the situation and drew up proposals for a 3-year truce, binding miner and operator. The operators scornfully refused. A mass meeting was called in Denver. Lindsay spoke. He demanded that the operators be made to respect the laws of Colorado, that something be done immediately. The Denver Real Estate Exchange appointed a committee to spit on Judge Lindsay for his espousal of the cause of the miners. Rockefeller got busy. Writers were hired to write pamphlets which were sent broadcast to every editor in the country, bulletins. In these leaflets it was shown how perfectly happy was the life of the miner until the agitators came, how joyous he was with the company's saloon, the company's pigsties for homes, the company's teachers and preachers and coroners, how the miners hated the state law of an 8-hour working day, begging to be allowed to work 10, 12, how they hated the state law that they should have their own check weighman to see that they were not cheated at the tipple, and all the while the mothers of the children who died in Ludlow were mourning their dead. End of chapter 21.